Slay the Princess is kind of a confusing game to talk about just because of the weird time loop and kind of the repetitiveness of some of the stories. They usually start out the same way, but they don't end exactly in the same place. So please bear with me as I try to explain what goes on in this game, because it is kind of confusing and it was a little hard for me to write this. Slay the Princess's story gets a little messy at times. There are several parts to the plot, and things get pretty confusing because of the looping timeline and just the fact that you have a very unreliable narrator. This character called the narrator is going to kind of direct you in the way that he wants you to go, so it's a little bit like the Stanley Parable and a few other games where the narrator isn't necessarily lying to you, but he isn't telling you the truth. And then you go and you talk to the princess, and she isn't really telling you the truth. And you don't know exactly what is going on or what actions you should take. It is explained that there are no wrong answers in this, as every single choice you make leads to a different ending. So let's back up a little bit. The game starts with your character standing on a path, and the narrator explains what you need to do. You have to walk up the path, go into the cabin, pick up the knife, go downstairs, and slay the princess. Pretty straightforward, but there's so much more to what's happening here that you just don't know. The narrator does warn you that the princess is going to try to manipulate you into setting her free, and that if she gets free, she is going to end the world somehow. The princess doesn't know how she's supposed to end the world, she doesn't know how long she has been in the basement, and she doesn't even know her own name. When you ask her these questions, she either deflects, doesn't answer it, or gives you kind of a confusing response. You can try to set her free, but you're always bottlenecked into trying to kill her, or bottlenecked into a way that would cause you to die. If you die, then everything gets reset. If she dies, then you can end the game that way, but you'll just have to restart in order to, get the right ending. When you die in this, you find out that you are basically in a time loop. So you start off with the narrator and this voice of a hero. Once you go through the first section and you either die or you kill the princess and then kill yourself, you'll reset on another path that looks a little bit different than the one before. You'll head to a cabin that looks a little bit different, and the princess herself will mostly look a little bit different. You'll also be given another character to talk to you, and that kind of depends on what your choices were in the previous one. It can be the voice of the smitten, the voice of the paranoid, the voice of the skeptic. There are a whole bunch of characters in this, and it makes the dialogue a little bit confusing, but you also are given advice from these different voices on what you can do. It's almost like they're a bunch of advisors who are trying to direct you in one of any directions, or trying to bottleneck you into a different set of choices. So there are a few endings in this. The easiest one to get is if you just go into the cabin, go downstairs, kill the princess, and then just kind of wait until the game is over. That can result in a very quick ending where you get the quote-unquote good ending, and you just kind of wrap things up in about 5 to 10 minutes or so. If you go for a different ending, it can take up to 4 hours. I've seen some estimates where there's like 190 hours of content in this game. I'm guessing if in order to get that, you need to go through all the possible choices that you can make, because you can get a bunch of different versions of the princess in this. You will also find out who the narrator is, who your character is, and who the princess is. But since everyone's kind of lying to you and manipulating you in different ways, I'm not really sure what the true ending of all of this was, or really what the end goal for many of these characters are. If you go through multiple playthroughs, you can probably ask different questions and set everything, or kind of piece everything together, so you may come to a better conclusion than I did. But at the end, at least in my playthrough, you and a version of the princess, who is made up of all the other versions that you saved, kind of go off into somewhere and are assumed to be happy, or at least I think they're happy. They're both well, at least the princess is smiling. You never actually see your face, so I'm guessing everything is okay then, but who knows. Overall, I like the story, but it kind of feels a little disjointed just because of the looping narrative that goes on. You are going through like this kind of a meta narrative where a larger story is being told, but that one takes a backseat to just these constant loops that you're going through. So I think I like it overall, but there are certain stories and certain quests that you go on, I'll just call them quests, that I didn't really get as engaged with as I did with others. It also would have helped if there was a little bit more gameplay than just the actual quests or just the dialogue options that you choose. Slay the Princess is an adventure game. You are choosing dialogue options, and you have very minimalistic gameplay going on. So you're just kind of going through the story, trying to see which different endings you can get from the different time loops, and essentially feeding versions of the princess to another version of the princess who's going to become some amalgamation of all of the other versions of herself. Yeah, it's kind of weird to really talk about. At first, the game sounds really easy. You just go into the cabin, kill the princess, move on. But then you go through all the different time loops. So, yeah, that's pretty much the gameplay entirely. You're just choosing different dialogue options and, yeah, seeing what different versions of the princess you can get. There are a lot of characters in this. You have the protagonist, who is yourself, the character that you're playing as, the princess, and she takes on a whole bunch of different forms and seemingly has a lot of different names depending on how you got to a certain spot, and just how you treated her in some ways. It's a little hard to explain. Then you have the narrator. You're going to run into a whole bunch of different versions of the narrator. He is just going to constantly lie and manipulate you into doing what he wants. And yeah, he also you end up finding out that he's just a variation of the main narrator of the whole game. It's confusing, or at least it gets very confusing. Then you have all the voices in your head. You have the voice of the hero, the voice of the opportunist, the voice of the paranoid, voice of the cold, voice of the cheated, voice of the hunted, voice of the stubborn, voice of the broken, voice of the smitten, voice of the contrarian, and voice of the skeptic. I think that's all of them. Those are all the ones that I encountered in this, but there might be more of them. I'm not really sure. having all these characters talk at the same time gets really confusing at moments, and it is kind of funny to see them debate back and forth, but yeah, there isn't a whole lot else to say about them. They kind of act as your advisors and sort of plant the seeds that the narrator is lying to you and not telling you everything that you need to know. Overall, I kind of like the gameplay. I like games like this, but there's something that I think is missing from this game that would probably appeal to more people. Just the fact that there's very little interactivity with it it's kind of one of its drawbacks. The graphics are both my favorite and also my least favorite part of the game. The biggest knock I have against the game is a few times in it, there's a lot of flickering and flashing that's going on, and that kind of messed with my head a little bit. It basically giving me a headache and making my eyes hurt. I don't think that's going to happen with everybody, but it did happen a few times, especially once she turns into a ghost. Then just weird shit happens, and yeah, it gave me a bit of a headache while I was trying to watch this. There isn't a lot of animation in this game, and most of it is just pictures with a few minor changes to it. I think the artwork looks really good. Once you look closer at it, it almost looks like a bunch of pencil drawings, like someone was drawing sketches of everything. And it looks really cool. I like the black and white style that they're going with just like shades of gray. And the only real color being used is this sort of like deep red. It looks really cool. I like it an awful lot. There isn't too much else to say about the visuals. The different versions of the princess look really good. It gets very dark at times the more that you go down some of these different paths, and the different ways that you find her and some of the choices that you have turn her into something really monstrous, and that's pretty awesome. Overall, I really like the visuals. I like the fact that you get this visual cue that things have changed. So every time you die and you start over in a time loop, things have changed a little bit. But every time loop starts out the same way, so you can see that you made a different choice just by how the timeline changes. I think it's really cool to show things like that, where you've done something, you go into a different timeline, and you can see how different it is from the previous one. And just the way you interact with the narrator, you can tell, yeah, he's not telling you everything because he's not even registering that anything has changed. There's also the mirror, which plays a pretty big role in what's happening, and the narrator never acknowledges that the mirror is there, and flat out tells you, no, you're just making stuff up. It's a very good-looking game. I don't really have a whole lot of problems with the graphics, aside from the few times that I got a headache while I was playing this. And I think that was probably more of me than the actual graphics. When I started playing this game, I really wasn't sure if I liked it all that much. There were parts of it that I found really cool, while others kind of left me scratching my head a bit. It has a fascinating story to go through. I like the artwork in it throughout the entire game. It's really great. There were only a few points where I just did not like the graphics that much, but for the most part, I think it was fine. There was something about the gameplay that I just didn't really connect with in some ways, just because I kind of got tired of picking the same dialogue options, and there is a repetitiveness to it, that I just didn't really like at times. it was cool to see the different things that could happen to the princess, like the different forms that she was going to take on, how the different actions you took or the inactions that you have, how those changed her personality over time. But then you would go through the whole thing and you'd start over and you'd have to go through the same dialogue tree again. So that early part in the game kind of felt repetitive to me because you were going through the same thing over and over again. And yeah, so that part got a little bit annoying. I'm not really sure if this is a game that I would want to revisit it at some time, but it is one that I had fun with it for a little while, but I'm not totally sure if I want to go back to it again. Writing this all out was pretty difficult. I'm not sure if I included everything I needed to, and given the time loops that make up the narrative, I wasn't really sure how to bring it up or how to bring up the different things that I went through while I was playing this. I like the game despite some of the minor issues with flickering images and sort of the minimalistic gameplay style. The best comparison I have is Killer Frequency. In that game, you could move around, though, and you would explore the radio station and that sort of thing, and there was more freedom in Killer Frequency than you had in something like Slay the Princess. Well, it's not a great comparison. They are sort of in the same genre of adventure games. They involve selecting dialogue options and alternating a story based on your choices. Slay the Princess takes this several steps further by having multiple stories, while Killer Frequency is more of a linear experience. I still think Slay the Princess is a fun game. It does have a simple gameplay style that kind of lets you focus on the story that the developer is trying to tell, but it can be confusing at times. You do get answers, but not all those answers are really achievable on the first playthrough, in my opinion. Anyway, let me know what you think in the comments below, and I will talk to you all later. Bye.